All right, so today we're going to continue our look at the commandments of God, especially those that are about loving your neighbor as yourself, the final 6 of the 10 commandments. And my contention is that the social justice movement, which loves to quote, love your neighbor as yourself, doesn't really know how to love their neighbor as themselves, and that at every point, at every law of the 10 commandments that love your neighbor summarizes, that they break it and they overturn it. And let's talk a little bit about the 6th commandment today, and that is the commandment, you shall not murder.
Should I slime myself?
Your move.
You fool! Attack, Kenobi!
Now, you might be saying, there's no way that social justice warriors promote murder. And in a way, you're right. I don't see a whole lot of social justice warrior Christians saying that you should go out and kill some people in order to achieve social justice. Now, that's not true of the pagan culture. There's a lot of pagan people that love to talk about murdering. For example, Black Lives Matter. But I have to tell you again today, I'm going to read to you today from the Westminster Larger Catechism, what are the duties required in the 6th commandment? The duties required in the 6th commandment are all careful studies and lawful endeavors to preserve the life of ourselves and others by resisting all thoughts and purposes, subduing all passions, avoiding all occasions, temptations, and practices which tend towards the unjust taking away of the life of any. By just defense thereof of violence, patient bearing of meat of the hand of God, quietness of mind, cheerfulness in spirit, a sober use of meat, drink, sleep, labor, and recreations, by charitable thoughts, love, compassions, meekness, gentleness, kindness, peaceable, mild, courteous speech and behavior, forbearance, readiness to be reconciled, patient bearing and forgiving of injuries, and requiting good for evil, comforting and securing the distressed, and protecting the defending the innocent. There is a lot involved in you shall not murder. It's not simply a command against killing, although it is that, but it also involves a lot of other things. It involves protecting life. There's a positive and negative aspect to every command, and Reformed people used to know this. There are some sins forbidden in the 6th commandment. Obviously, you can't take away life, except in the case of public justice, so the death penalty, things like that. Lawful war, necessary defense. Pay attention, gun grabbers. That is part of the 6th commandment. The neglecting or withdrawing of the lawful and necessary means of preservation of life. Sinful anger is something that the 6th commandment forbids. Envy, desire of revenge, all excessive passions, distracting cares, immoderate use of meat, drink, labor, recreations, provoking words, oppression, quarreling, striking, wounding, and whatever else tends to the destruction of life. So this is much more than just actual physical killing. It talks about things that tend towards death, which all you got to do is look at the history books, and socialism is one of those things that tends towards death. It's also about hating people. It's also about slandering people and using words that provoke. It's also about having envy, and also about quarreling and that kind of thing. And so, if these are the things that the sin commandments, the commandment forbids. And I think that once you start to see that sort of full-orbed thing, then you'll see exactly why the social justice warrior movement breaks this commandment constantly. R.J. Rushdoony, in his great book, The Institutes of Biblical Law, says this about the 6th commandment. He's talking about the police power, or the ability to sort of judge things that every person has. He says, our police power involves action against backbiting and tale-bearing. It also requires that we, in love of our neighbor, have a regard for his property as well as his reputation to avoid injury to it. This is certainly no less true of his family, marriage, and his wife. Now, I want to start with talking about the posture of people they should be ready to be reconciled. When somebody comes and asks for your forgiveness, you should be willing to accept it. You should not be holding or lording things over people. And this is common in the social justice movement. Thabiti Abenwili famously said, "We await repentance for killing Dr. King." Well, people have repented about that for many, many years, and I've seen white people flog themselves trying to absolve themselves of the sin of participating in killing Dr. King, even if they didn't do it. But you still don't see forgiveness. You still don't see reconciliation. So I would suggest that the social justice warriors break the sixth commandment by not being ready to be reconciled. They say they are, but in reality, they are not. Another aspect of that is bearing and forgiving of injuries. Again, this is the kind of thing where you'll see people that just simply don't accept apologies. You can apologize all day long, up and down. You can have conferences about MLK. You can have conferences about racial reconciliation. And if you make one wrong move, they will be against you, like at the Southern Baptist Convention inviting Pence to speak. Whew! That was trouble in paradise right there. The sixth commandment also speaks to envy and desire of revenge. So much of the social justice warrior movement expresses this desire for revenge. And the segregation thing at the Gospel Coalition, it said, well, we want to have spaces just our own because you have spaces that are just your own. That was a lot of the defense. It's like, well, white people will gather, so we want to gather in segregated ways. That's not how it works. That's an envy. That is a desire for revenge. We see this a lot where people will say, well, we need to have our own institution so we can be in leadership. You have leadership and I want leadership. That's an envy. That's a desire for revenge. That breaks the sixth commandment. It doesn't love your neighbor as yourself. Excessive passions, distracting cares. Social justice, if it's anything, it's an excessive passion. It is a distracting care. It absolutely distracts from the gospel when you're trying to eliminate all of these disparities and have some kind of an equity with economics and wealth and things like that. You can look in the Bible all day long and you will never find God say that a goal of the gospel is that everyone has equal. All races, all ethnicities, all gender have the same wealth, the same power, all of these things. You don't find it because it's not biblical. And so this desire to have complete equity everywhere, that's a socialist desire. That is not a biblical desire, and it is an excessive passion. It is a distracting care. Provoking words. I don't have to put tweets on the screen to prove to you that the SJW movement is all about provoking words. They are all about quarreling. They will nitpick to death. They will make accusations. They will call you white supremacist. They will call you racist. And if that's not fighting words, I don't know what is. Now the question is, why are all these things included in the sixth commandment? And I would suggest that you would read the reformers on this. I would suggest that you read those that were involved in the Westminster Catechism or even the London Baptist Confession and things like that. That is where you find a lot of this stuff, and they see what their biblical warrant is. But I think Jesus even very simply tells you why this is. He says, if you hate your brother in your heart, you've committed murder. And that's not to say that you should be tried as a murderer, because there's a difference between crime and sin. That's not to say you should be tried as a murderer if you're promoting socialism. However, it is a sin. It is not loving your neighbor as yourself. So when you see a social justice warrior saying we need to love our neighbor as ourselves and promoting socialist and cultural Marxist ideologies, you know they are not loving their neighbor as themselves. They are actually using that scripture as a slogan. Now, one time, Thabiti Abenwili, people talk about this all the time, where he kind of said that to him, racism was a more important issue than abortion, and so he was okay. He actually at one point said that for African Americans, they should vote for Bernie Sanders. And a lot of people thought that was weird because Bernie Sanders is about infanticide, like not just regular abortion, like partial birth abortion, which is essentially the same exact thing as infanticide. You pull the baby out, you stick him in the back of the neck, and you off him, essentially. That's what abortion is. That's what partial abortion is. It's offing little babies. Sanders has support for that. And what's so crazy about this is abortion, killing, that kind of murder, which that's what it is. That breaks the sixth commandment. That happens to African Americans in greater rates than it does whites. It happens to, in fact, in New York City, more blacks are killed in abortion than are born alive. That is an atrocity. And so how can Thabiti say that Sanders was the best vote for African Americans? Well, I would assume it would be probably some kind of economic benefit that they would get, some kind of socialism, some kind of welfare. I'm not entirely sure, but also, you know, if racism's more important than killing, well, is it? And now racism is a type of murder. Racism breaks the sixth commandment. However, it is not a crime. In the Bible, you won't find a crime and punishment for the sin of racism. It is a sin, but it's not a crime. Murder, however, is something that is a crime, and there's a just restitution for it. And if you commit murder and on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, you're found guilty, you ought to be put to death. That does not break the sixth commandment. Putting someone to death for killing somebody else is an application of love your neighbor as yourself. That's how you love your neighbor, by executing murderers. Now, the question is, why does God say that one is a crime that needs to be the person needs to be executed, and the sin of racism is just a sin? Well, there are some crimes that God wants restitution to be made instantly, and he wants to face and judge that person right away. When you commit a murder, you are trying to destroy the image of God. You need to face God and his judgment right away, and so we execute you and you face your maker. That's how it works. But the sin of racism is a little bit different. Now, it's not to say that it's not bad. It's not to say it doesn't condemn you. However, God, in his sovereignty, in his holiness, has decided that that's not one of those sins that he needs to face you right away. That's one of those sins that you can hope for reconciliation, Christian reconciliation. But you better make sure you're in a posture of ready to be reconciled, not lording things over people, not holding back your forgiveness, because if you do, you are breaking the sixth commandment. And so that's how social justice warriors break the sixth commandment. That's how they commit the sin of murder, and that is how they are not loving their neighbor as themselves. I hope this was helpful. God bless.